Hello and welcome. It's the CIMA Operational Case Study 10-minute video series, video number 7, and my name's Sandy Hood. We are studying the Manseco scenario, which was presented 6 weeks ahead of the exam, and working through individual topics. Today we look at short-term decision making, and in particular the linear programming methods needed to identify the best production mix. Now, within this is the general area of limiting factors. So we're thinking about some of the inputs that could be in short supply, and I think a little bit of background knowledge from the P1 syllabus. A limiting factor means that the business does not have sufficient inputs to be able to produce the volume that it could sell, so that there's enough demand for several different products and they don't have enough inputs to produce them all. So the business needs to find the best combination of products from those limited inputs. Now, in the recent exams, this was tested in February 2017 twice, in the variant number 2 and in variant number 3. And in May it was tested in variant number 2, and in November variant number 3. Here is one of those questions, and it is obviously a whole section, and just taking you down to the questions themselves: how the damage to the finished goods inventory in the forklift truck will affect our financial statements for the year. Please make reference to the appropriate financial reporting rules. Is obviously a task which is going to be testing impairment. And here's the task within this section that affects us. We have used the linear programming graph, and how can we use it to estimate our optimal production plan. Also, that extra word, that word that tells you there's another element to this task. Explain whether we should consider buying additional dried cedar, and take up the offer of the 3 members of staff. So here we've got a scenario where we've recognizing the linear programming graph, but also we're being asked effectively whether we've got some shadow prices that are suitable. Here is the graph, and you can see that they have presented you with at the bottom. It is our optimal production plan line, and then here you've got the other various lines, and they tell you which they each are. So line A, X has got to be more than or equal to 450, indicating that we're looking at a minimum level of production, presumably because they've got a guaranteed sale. And then they've got line B, which is that the number of units produced has got to be less than less than or equal to the amount of the dried cedar available. And similarly, the cutting hours, that puts a limit on the amount of cutting hours that can be used, a limit on the packing hours. So that would be one way in which this topic can be tested. In this particular scenario, we're looking at the 7 marks for technical skills, 6 marks for people skills. Sometimes this mark allocation isn't easy to spot. Sure, we would know that there would be 2 elements within the task, and the fact that one's worth 6 and one's worth 7 is quite normal, because we know that they will split it as evenly as they can, and obviously 13 doesn't split precisely into 2 round numbers. And this is half of a 45-minute section, so we would be looking for 22.5 minutes for each, and that would be 4.5 or 5 minutes for planning, and then with the remainder of the time for the writing up. And so here we've allocated 18 minutes for the writing up. So we want to use that time to effectively get the right number of marks. So the 9 minutes would be for how how we understand the linear programming graph, and that would give us a minimum of 4 paragraphs. Similarly, we would want a minimum of 2 paragraphs each for the 2 areas where we're looking at whether it's worthwhile to have additional input resources. Okay, so now we've got our practice question, and here we've got Anders Bukati asking us, the production of the Megan range has been increased to cope with the surge in demand, and this has meant that the only other ranges we are able to produce are the small and medium Abbotsford crossbody bags. I have put together a linear programming graph which I'd like to show to the directors, together with an interpretation of the meaning of the graph. Well, instantly you know that you're going to have to be very clear with your explanation, and you can take nothing for granted in terms of their underpinning knowledge, because he's showing it to the other directors. So here, please prepare a report for me covering the following areas: an explanation of each of the axes, lines, points and areas which have been labelled, and how we should use the graph to determine our production plan if we're trying to maximise our short-term profits. Then, of course, one of those little "and" words: what other factors would need to be considered before making a final decision on our production plan? So you need to understand the pre-scene, you don't need to remember any numbers from it, and this understanding then comes through. We have to identify the question. In this case, I think that there's 2 elements, so we've got to understand both questions, and then we've got to plan the answer, and then do all the tasks in one section at once, of course, in the exam, but here within this 10-minute session we're just looking at half of a section. Then we would check that our plan addresses the task requirements, and then quick. So at this stage we identify the question, and we've got our 4.5 minutes available for that and for planning the answer. Here is the linear programming for R1. We've been told that there's a maximum demand for small bags, and there's been a maximum demand for the medium-sized bags, and the sewing time, nappa leather, presumably the leather that we use to make the bags with, and the nubuck thread, presumably the thread that we use to sew up the bags. And again, we've got these limiting factors. We have to be able to look at the graph, and we can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, 1 area and a point, and these are the areas that they want us to be able to write about within our answer. An explanation of each of the axes, the X and the Y, the lines, we've identified all the lines, the points and the areas. So we write this up, and here we go straight into the word processing document, and that enables us to save time rather than going onto a scratch pad for our planning. Straight in then, the planning time, putting through the explanation, how we would use the graph to determine the production plan, and then what other factors would need to be considered. In we go. We've got 10 different paragraph headings. We may well have more than 1 paragraph under some of these, but these are the identification of how we're going to produce this report that we've been asked for. After the plan, we make sure that our plan really answers the task. They want an explanation of each of the axes, and how would we use the graph to determine our production plan to try to maximise our short-term profits, and the other factors that need to be considered. We've listed 10 headings. That's plenty, because when we're looking at this, we're looking for enough to give us 64%, and that would only need 8 paragraphs. So we would have to write pretty fast to complete all 10 headings. So we give ourselves a tick, and then we can move on and we start to write up the paragraphs. On this occasion, I've not written the paragraphs for you, because that would then take me over my 10 minutes. But you can certainly think about it in terms of this particular scenario. Limiting factors are key to short-term decision making. Manseco is a manufacturer, so there's plenty of opportunities for the examiner to test this topic. Look at a single input. Sure, that may well be a limiting factors issue, or multiple inputs, and that would be a linear programming issue. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you for our next introductory reporting. Bye bye.